In the earliest days of creation, when the universe was being shaped with infinite wisdom, God looked to the primordial seas and gave life to a monstrous creature, Leviathan. Majestic and terrifying, Leviathan was the personification of God's supreme power over creation. However, what many are unaware of is that this creature, however impressive, possessed a deep secret that would change the course of the universe. Prepare to discover why God created such a powerful creature and paradoxically chose to destroy it to protect his creation. On the fifth day of creation, God, with his incomparable wisdom, formed the seas and the creatures that would inhabit them. Among them, Leviathan appeared, a colossal creature, a multi-headed sea dragon whose eyes shone with the power of the ocean. Leviathan was not only a masterpiece of creation, but also a symbol of God's absolute dominion over all that existed. With its serpentine body and movements that made the seas royal, Leviathan seemed indomitable. Its roar echoed across the abysses, making even the bravest marine beings move away. He was the embodiment of God's power over the depths of the ocean, a creation that reminded humanity of the greatness of its creator. However, Leviathan was no simple creature, and what appeared to be a marvel of strength and beauty hid a question of cosmic balance. As God observed his creation, a question arose in his mind. How far could this creature's power be allowed before it unbalanced the entire creation? Leviathan, despite being a perfect creation, carried within him a potential that would require a decision that would change the course of creation. Leviathan was not alone. There was a female, equally immense and powerful. Together they formed a force of nature capable of rivaling any creation in the universe. Their bodies intertwined across the seas, moving like a storm that threatened to swallow everything in its path. But God, in his godly wisdom, knew that despite being magnificent, the Leviathans were not creatures made to coexist in harmony with the rest of creation. They had the power to destroy and restructure the world around them, something that, in the wrong hands, could unleash chaos. The balance of the universe depended on order and justice, and Leviathan, with his immense power, represented a force that could challenge that order. Over time, the threat of a multiplication of these beings began to become real. If the female Leviathan produced offspring, the world could be consumed by the ferocity of these creatures. It was then that God made the difficult decision to intervene, before it was too late. Although he gave life to Leviathan, he knew that he needed to be wise enough to protect his creation from any imbalance that might arise. Thus, God made the most drastic decision of all, submitting creation to the sacrifice of one of the Leviathans. God's decision was made wisely, but also with an immense emotional burden. The female Leviathan, who represented both the power of God and the danger of chaos, would be destroyed to ensure that creation remained in balance. However, the magnitude of this act was not simple. In ordering the female to be slaughtered, God knew that this would not only be a test of his authority, but also a revelation of his character. God's justice often demands sacrifice. The creature's flesh, once a symbol of indomitable strength, would be used to feed the righteous, transforming the sacrifice into a gift for those who followed God's will. This action was not just a measure to contain evil, it was a way of showing that God's wisdom transcends any destructive force. But the male Leviathan, unlike the female, would not be defeated easily. He remained in the depths of the ocean, defying the Creator with his immense presence. Their resistance symbolized the constant struggle between good and evil, between order and chaos, and God knew the battle was not over. When the female Leviathan was slain, the waters of the sea shook, and a deep stillness came over the oceans. The sacrifice was painful, but essential. God had fulfilled his promise to protect creation, and the creature's flesh was used to sustain those who followed his righteousness. The righteous celebrated God's intervention, recognizing that although the sacrifice was great, the protection and balance of the universe were more valuable. However, the male Leviathan, still alive and immense, watched from its depths, his eyes burning with rage. He refused to accept the Creator's order being imposed upon him, and his fury was palpable. God knew that with the male Leviathan, the situation would be more complex. This one would not bend easily, and the fight to subdue it would require more than the simple strength of God. He would need something more. In his infinite wisdom, God called the archangel Gabriel, the most powerful of his servants, to help. Gabriel, imbued with courage and authority, accepted the mission, aware that this battle would not be like any other. It would be a fight that would define the destiny of chaos and the continuity of creation. Gabriel descended from the heavenly spheres to face the creature that challenged God's creation. Upon arriving at the primordial seas, the archangel saw the male Leviathan in all his immensity, his presence so threatening that it made the waters around him boil. The battle that would ensue would not only be a physical fight, but also a spiritual battle, a test of God's authority over the forces of chaos. The Leviathan, with its multiple heads and serpentine body, roared with such force that it made the sky darken. But Gabriel, with his flaming sword, did not hesitate. The fight was fierce. Each blow from Gabriel echoed like thunder in the heavens, and the creature, although powerful, seemed to feel the weight of God's authority. But Leviathan was not willing to give in. It twisted, moved with supernatural speed, trying to envelop Gabriel in its undulations. With each attack, the archangel dodges and counterattacks, each movement precise, guided by God's wisdom. Gabriel knew that, no matter how powerful the creature was, it could not overcome the strength of God's will. But the battle was far from over, and God, once again, would have to intervene to ensure that chaos did not dominate creation. As Gabriel and Leviathan fought in the vast ocean, the waves rose like mountains, and the sky seemed to tear into lightning. The archangel, although immensely powerful, felt the creature's resistance. Leviathan was not just a beast, he was a manifestation of primordial chaos, a force that challenged the order of the universe. As the battle intensified, Gabriel realized that the fight was not just physical, but also a deep spiritual dilemma. Every blow he struck seemed to resonate in the depths of the universe, touching the limits of creation. Leviathan, in turn, tried to envelop Gabriel with his uncontrolled forces, an attempt to destroy the very balance that God had established. The sea creature represented something bigger, the evil itself that tried to corrupt God's plan. Gabriel, although strong and determined, could not defeat him alone without God's intervention. He needed a sign, something to guide him to victory. It was at this moment of maximum tension that the sky shone with an intense light. God, in his infinite wisdom, sent a direct command, strengthening Gabriel's arm. With this help, the battle took on a new direction. The light of God that shone upon the battlefield was like a beacon, guiding Gabriel with renewed clarity and power. With God's command, the archangel felt a transcendent force taking over his being. The sword he wielded, now shrouded in an aura of godlike light, cut through the air with deadly precision. The Leviathan, even with its immense strength, seemed to falter for the first time. God's light was breaking down the creature's defenses, and the chaos it represented was beginning to give way to God's order. However, Leviathan did not give up easily. He writhed, trying to envelop Gabriel once more, in a desperate attempt to escape God's hold. But now, the fight was decided not just by physical strength, but by the will of God. Gabriel, with unshakable determination, advanced, delivering blows that resonated with the justice of God. The creature, which once seemed invincible, was being tamed, like chaos being subdued by order. The tension reached its peak. The Leviathan, with its last efforts, roared with a fury that seemed to echo throughout the universe. But God, through Gabriel, was about to guarantee the definitive balance. As Leviathan fought with all his might, the struggle became a symbol of cosmic resistance. But as the battle raged, new revelations began to emerge. Leviathan's every movement revealed how deeply he was rooted in primordial chaos, a force that could not be easily eradicated. Gabriel, now with the strength of God, was able to understand the true nature of the creature. Leviathan was not just a threat, but a representation of evil that, if left unchecked, could unbalance God's creation. However, the fight was far from resolved. The creature continued to twist, more cunning and fierce than ever. Gabriel, in the midst of the battle, began to realize that it was not enough to just defeat Leviathan physically, but he also needed to understand his role within God's greater plan. Leviathan, despite being a force of chaos, was a part of God's balance. He existed to test the faith and strength of creation. Thus, Gabriel not only faced him as a beast, but also as a reflection of the eternal conflict between order and chaos. God's wisdom was guiding the archangel, but the price of that wisdom was high. As the fight dragged on, the tension increased, and the battle between Gabriel and Leviathan reached a critical point. The archangel, with his renewed strength, knew he needed to act decisively. The Leviathan, with its almost supernatural resistance, continued to writhe and attack with fury, but time was running out. The nature of the conflict was no longer just about destroying the creature, but about restoring balance to the universe. Something that could only be done through a final action that combined strength and wisdom. In a daring maneuver, Gabriel advanced with his sword towards the Leviathan's heart. But before the blow could be struck, Leviathan let out a deafening roar, a last attempt to break God's order. At that moment, the sky lit up even more intensely, and Gabriel, imbued with the power of God, raised his sword. He knew that his victory would not come through brute force, but through the wisdom of God, which gave him the necessary discernment to carry out the final blow. With a precise movement, Gabriel struck the creature's weak point, undoing its strength and freeing the seas from the grip of chaos. Leviathan finally gave in. With Leviathan finally defeated, silence took over the seas. The creature's roar, which had previously reverberated like a force of chaos, now dissipated into the calm waters, and a sense of relief spread across the universe. Gabriel, although victorious, knew that the battle had not just been a test of strength, but a lesson in wisdom from God. The end of Leviathan did not just mean the destruction of a creature, but the restoration of the order that God had created. The archangel, with his sword still shining, looked towards the horizon where the waters were beginning to calm down. It was evident that the price of this victory was high, but God's wisdom would always prevail. At that moment, God spoke to Gabriel, not with words, but with a deep sense of peace. The battle had been won, but the true victory lay in understanding the role of chaos in God's great plan. Leviathan, although defeated, had fulfilled its function within creation to remind human beings and angels of the need to maintain balance and wisdom in the face of the destructive forces that have always existed. And now, Gabriel knew that chaos would no longer have power over the cosmos. With the fall of Leviathan, creation seemed to breathe again, with the still waters reflecting the majesty of God. However, the tension that dissipated in the seas still reverberated in the universe. Gabriel, exhausted but at peace, knew that the confrontation was not an end, but a new beginning. The defeat of Leviathan symbolized the reassertion of God's sovereignty, but also a reminder that chaos would never be completely absent from creation. It was a profound lesson in the need for constant vigilance. The archangel, now with his mission accomplished, returned to heaven, but the wisdom he had acquired during the battle would remain with him forever. God, with his infinite vision, knew the weaknesses and challenges of creation. God's intervention not only restored order, but also taught everyone that even in adversity, God's wisdom and power would prevail. The battle against Leviathan showed once again that destructive forces can be confronted, not with pure force, but with understanding and wisdom. In the end, Gabriel knew that creation, now safe, was in harmony. Evil would be contained and balance restored, but God's wisdom must always be sought. When God, in his infinite wisdom, revealed the greater purpose of Leviathan. Gabriel's fight against the monstrous creature was not just about defeating an evil force, but also about understanding that chaos, although destructive, played a role in creation. Leviathan, with his uncontrollable strength and terrifying presence, represented the challenge that God placed before everyone, the fight to preserve God's order in the midst of chaos. The archangel Gabriel, by defeating Leviathan, not only restored the balance of the cosmos, but also came closer to the wisdom that God wanted him to understand. The final confrontation was not a simple physical battle. It was a spiritual battle, where true strength revealed itself in understanding God's mission. God not only subdued the creature, but used it to show everyone, including the angels themselves, that God's wisdom was the key to mastering any destructive force. Gabriel, now with Leviathan finally defeated, understood that, without chaos, creation would not be complete. God had balanced the forces of the universe, not by eliminating evil, but by controlling it with wisdom, revealing that eternal balance is only achieved through understanding God. After the defeat of Leviathan and the restoration of God's balance, Gabriel reflected on what he had learned. Chaos and order, evil and good, were intertwined in God's creation, and true power was not in destroying what seemed threatening, but in mastering and understanding the forces that make up the universe. Leviathan, although a creature of immense power, was a tool in God's hand to teach a profound lesson. True control over chaos comes from God's wisdom, not brute force. Gabriel, now with a deeper understanding of creation and God's plan, knew that the universe was safer, but also more complex than before. Evil, represented by Leviathan's fury, would never disappear completely, but it could be contained and understood. This balance was what kept creation intact. The archangel returned to the heavens, now wiser and more aware that God's purpose is always greater than any destructive force. As God's creatures, we too are called to understand and embrace God's wisdom, trusting that even in adversity, He remains sovereign and will guide His children to peace. Now that you've learned the secret behind Leviathan's creation and destruction, it's impossible not to reflect on God's wisdom that governs the universe. This story reminds us that even in the face of the most destructive forces, God has control, and His wisdom is what guarantees order and balance in our lives. If you also believe that true strength lies in understanding God's plan, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any more powerful stories like this. Share this video with those who need a reminder of God's sovereignty and the importance of God's wisdom in our challenges. And don't forget to watch the next video where we explore more of the deep mysteries and eternal lessons God has to teach us. Stay with us and continue the journey of wisdom and incredible stories.